Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 19th of December, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. Our number is 1-800-472-0391 for your latest weather forecast information. That's a toll-free call anywhere in Alaska. Weather.gov/Alaska is our easy page to remember there. One click on the map will take you to your local forecast office, and one more click on your spot on the map will get you to your hyper-local forecast there for your part of Alaska. And of course, if you can't find what you're looking for, if it's ice thickness information from the River Forecast Center or the forecast office in Fairbanks, or you're looking for aviation weather, or you just can't seem to find the radar picture that you're looking for, please let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can. And don't forget that all of the TV weather images that you see on this show tonight are either on Facebook already from our local forecast offices, or they're on the TV link at the bottom of the page. Look for the TV maps, click the button, and there you go. You'll find all the maps that you need. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me. From our friends in Juneau this afternoon, you can see some of the snow totals that we've had around the Haines area, both from yesterday and again today. Haines Custom and the Haines reporting site there have totaled anywhere from about 14 to 15.5 inches of some wet snow in the region. So certainly a little bit of snow falling in the area. And it looks like it's going to continue. In fact, a winter weather advisory is posted again for the Haines area and Skagway this time. Looks like you might see 2 to maybe as much as 5 inches of snow into the evening and overnight hours and early tomorrow morning. Don't be surprised to find additional snowfall on top of that 14 to 15 inches. But that was just for the Haines area. Skagway didn't see that amount of snow at all. So again, certainly more snow coming into northern parts of the Lynn Canal. As you look up north, winter weather advisories are posted for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. That's primarily due to wind. Winds coming out of the east around 30 miles per hour will blow snow around and lower visibility there. That should continue tonight and into tomorrow. Out around the Bering Strait communities, we expect to see winds a little bit stronger, up to 50 miles per hour, and 2 to 4 inches of snow possible in the region there. So visibility will continue to stay low all the way through tonight and tomorrow. And same goes for the Yukon Delta. Their winter weather advisory is posted for you. Also due to blowing snow, winds will be closer to the 40-mile-an-hour range at their greatest extent, and expecting about 2 to 4 inches of snow there. So poor visibility in all the areas, mainly due to snow, and snow amounts they're coming down fairly quickly around the Haines and Skagway area. As we look out to the west around the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island again is expected to see that reduction in visibility and additional snow. When we're talking about winter weather advisories, it primarily means that something is going to obscure the visibility, make that worse. So in this case, it's going to be blowing snow. And we're also looking for additional accumulations of snow, and that's not always the case. Sometimes it could just be the blowing snow. In this case, we're talking about 2 to 4 inches around St. Lawrence Island and the western end from Wales down to Teller. This is going to start around 6 o'clock tonight for St. Lawrence Island for Gamble and Toowoomba. And the other concern, of course, is like I was saying, the wind gusts up to about 50 miles per hour may cause areas of blowing and drifting snow. So travel could be a little more tricky than normal. And of course, if you can't see where you're going or where you've been, that makes that even harder. So be careful out there. And remember, a winter weather advisory will start up around 6 o'clock tonight and gradually work its way into the western end of St. Lawrence Island as we head into tomorrow morning. Here's a look at the weather systems as we see them right now. Out west, let's start there. We have this new weather system working in across the western Bering, a powerful area of low pressure behind it. You can see the cold air wrapping in behind it. That's what the speckled clouds are in the west. As that front's working its way towards St. Matthew tonight, it will make it into St. Lawrence Island as we head through the evening hours and eventually out toward the western end of the Bering, of the Seward Peninsula, I should say, from Wales to Teller. As this is sweeping across the central and eastern Aleutians, we'll probably see spotty areas of rain and snow. The winds will certainly come up there. And then as you look out to the east, another area of very ragged low pressure sits across the eastern Gulf, and that is what's been slinging that southeasterly flow up into the northern Lynn Canal. It's really focused on Haines the last couple of days, like we saw, anywhere from about 14 to 15.5 inches over the last 2 days there in Haines. Around Skagway, though, the winds haven't, and the cold air haven't lined up just right in Skagway. That looks like that's going to change for tonight. So again, Skagway and Haines now under a winter weather advisory for tonight into tomorrow. The other factor is a disturbance working its way across the Beaufort Seacoast. As this is dragging right across the central and eastern coastlines, that's been stirring up the wind, and now that easterly flow coming in is going to pick up there. So for places like Kaktovik and around Demarcation Point, we're expecting to see some blowing snow in the region. A primary factor, though, for probably additional snowfall will be here around the Bering Strait and also around the Yukon Delta as this weather system is moving in. So new snow, wind, and some new snow, and just big cold across the interior. The satellite picture also shows a lot of cold air. You can see that not a lot of movement here across the interior. That is that satellite image picking up on that deep cold air across the region. That looks to be the trend for the next couple of days. And in fact, that Arctic front is gradually going to slip southward toward Kodiak and the Kenai Peninsula and a few areas across northern parts of Southeast. So if you don't think it's cold yet, it's going to get a lot colder. This is that line that we're talking about, this Arctic front. And there's a disturbance here around 996 millibars, several other waves of low pressure. This is the main ragged one we are looking at on the satellite picture right now. Southeasterly flow bringing rain up through southeast, out to the west. Another ripple in that overall front, working its way up through the central and eastern chain. And then the main low, just south of the Gulf of Anadyr, working its way eastward. And it's going to be a pretty quick mover in the northern parts of this, already seeing some snow around the Bering Strait. And this big old cold high at 1,020 millibars, certainly not the strongest, largest area of high pressure that we've seen in wintertime, but it has some deep cold. Fort Yukon temperatures, they're running in the 40 below range there, and many other locations across the interior west, anywhere from 20 to 30 below already today. And this cold is pushing its way southward because it can. It is dense, cold air, and with the Earth spinning, this is just simple physics here, that cold air wants to go out toward the equator. It's not going to get that far before it moderates and warms up, but because it's doing that, it is certainly moving south, slinging its way slowly toward the equator and trying to work over the Alaska Range. And boy, folks in south central, Prince William Sound and southeast probably happy for it. And across the west, that frontal boundary is getting closer to the west coast tonight. It will make it into St. Lawrence Island and the western end of the Bering Strait as we get into the early morning hours. As it's crossing through the Aleutians, you'll see rain switching over to snow in the west, probably looking at some areas of increased precipitation as we get into Saturday night and Sunday out in the west for Shemya as another storm system's coming up. In southeast, winter weather advisories will be in effect for Haines and Skagway there, but that's about it. It'll start to get a little breezy around the Copper River Delta. That's pretty typical for the amount of cold air trying to work its way through the valleys there. Might see some ice fog around Fort Yukon, and as we get into Friday, the front works its way to the west. Crossed arrows here mean blowing snow, and that fits with our weather pattern that we were talking about, winter weather advisories there in the north, and also around the Haines area, but not so much for wind. That'll be for snowfall for you. Low pressure sits well south of Port Alexander at 986, and high pressure moves in quickly behind that front at 1,021 millibars. So we have a flat flow, that westerly flow tracking across the Bering will keep that front moving into the west coast over Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound, probably move the ice around a little bit. High pressure doesn't move across the eastern interior. That sits at 1,022 millibars. And again, ice fog on either side of that. That Arctic front just oozing its way slowly southward. And as we get into Saturday, you can see it slips even further out to the south, maybe right along the coast, which means that the coldest day of the year, or at least this season, will be upon the Kenai Peninsula. Our Prince William Sound friends, most of South Central, Wasilla, Palmer, all the way up toward Houston, Willow, Talkeetna. It's going to be cold, and there will be some air moving through too, so wind chill may be part of that feels like issue that you have on Saturday. For southeast, it looks sloppy. Rain mainly in the south, and then that rain and snow transition very close to Juneau, Gustavus, and probably on the snow side of things for Haines and Skagway. High pressure sitting in the same place with ice fog there. And then we introduce a new fly in the ointment. And it's a big fly. It's like Mothra size. 960 millibar low, cruising through the shipping channel here out in the west, and making its way into the southern Bering Sea. It certainly looks like it's going to bring in storm force winds. We're watching to see if this looks like it'll bring in hurricane force winds. So right now, there's a pretty good potential that we'll see some of those stronger winds working their way into Attu and Shemya. So know anybody headed out there or already there, you might want to give them a heads up. It does look like there's going to be some big weather out there as we get into Saturday and Sunday. And those winds are also going to precede the storm, and that means the Pribilovs may be on the leading edge of those first wave of winds. So as you get into Saturday night and Sunday, winds could be coming up sharply to maybe storm force there as well. So if you're in the west, the Chain, the Pribilovs, and certainly Attu, you want to keep watching this weather as we head into the weekend. Here's a look at temperatures. 30s in southeast, south central, teens, 20s for Kodiak, Bristol Bay, quickly cooling off into sub-zero readings around King Salmon and Dillingham. 24 below in Fairbanks, 43 below in Fort Yukon. Up north on the slope, anywhere from 5 to 15 below. Temperatures don't budge much there Friday afternoon, anywhere from 20 to 40 below in the interior. Southwest, McGrath, all the way to Bethel, single digits and low teens, 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast also looking at 30s and 40s, much warmer south of Juneau. Teens and 20s for South Central. Overnight lows again, pushing 50 below Saturday morning in Fort Yukon. Yes, big time cold. Daytime high temperatures barely budge as we go through your Saturday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation weather now. IFR concerns will start out Friday morning all the way from just south of the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island. South of that, a lot of that heavy cloud cover should break up at least a little bit, so marginal conditions are expected across a good part of the Aleutians and most of the Alaska Peninsula there, especially south and west of Sand Point. As you look out to the east, low pressure here across the southern Yukon and British Columbia will still be slopping over some of the very wet air, so we can expect IFR concerns maybe as far west as Mentasta Pass. But by and large, most of the interior, southwest, south central, Kodiak Island, all looks to be VFR. We may have some ice fog lingering here in the Yukon Valley, so watch out for that, but it looks to be a lot more isolated than what we're drawing on the map here. For many parts of southeast, watch for marginal concerns to start up your day. Chilkoot and White Pass may start at IFR, and of course, marginal conditions will extend out into the Gulf in the vicinity of low pressure. For Friday afternoon, the next front is working its way eastward, so we'll see IFR now stretching from the Chukchi Sea all the way through the Bering Strait and into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, Bristol Bay, and then south of the Alaska Peninsula. Out to the west, clearing takes place behind that a little bit, and some of the clouds will lift a little bit as well. So the result should be VFR conditions there for many out west, including St. Paul and St. George, and really most of the Aleutian Islands at this point. IFR concerns will pull a little bit further to the east there, surrounding the low-pressure system in the Yukon, so we'll get a little bit of improvement around Mentasta Pass. Maybe as bad as MVFR, but maybe as good as VFR by the end of the day. Look for continued improvement there across south central, southwest, and the interior, but again, hit-and-miss ice fog could still be an issue there up around the Yukon Flats. Southeast should see improvement. Marginal conditions push into the southern parts of the Dixon entrance and around Ketchikan, Annette, Craig, and Klawock. Elsewhere, things look to be pretty good. You'll see IFR setting back Saturday morning, though, just as fast. Northern passes look to be marginal at worst. Around Yakutat and Icy Cape, looking for IFR concerns there. The front moving in from the west will still bring IFR conditions through Nome, out to areas in the northern sections of the Yukon Delta, generally east of Hooper Bay at this point, down to Bethel, and then hit and miss marginal concerns across Bristol Bay and just south of Kodiak, a little bit of marginal around the Yukon Flats as well, probably due to ice fog. IFR is back across the west. You see another round of IFR building in across the western Bering. This is associated with a much larger low pressure system that could bring at least storm force winds now to the Aleutians for Saturday into Sunday, and maybe as strong as hurricane force winds, so stay tuned for that. IFR concerns will develop across the higher train and your northern passes and through the capital city and southeast for Saturday afternoon. Here are your pass conditions and details. We always show them to you there. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass expected to be VFR. There could be some ice fog there south of the passes especially. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass all the way to Rainy Pass and Windy Pass look to be pretty good. VFR expected there. Isabel Pass, probably VFR, but Mentasta Pass, again, the eastern zones there, the eastern Alaska Range, likely start out at least at IFR and maybe improve to at least marginal concerns as we get into the afternoon. That could get even better. Tanita Pass looks to be VFR and Portage Pass VFR. Chilkoot and White Pass, those start at IFR. And we're going to say improve all the way to VFR. Let's be optimistic for your Friday there. It looks like things should be getting better. As we get into Friday morning, freezing levels show that next wave of warmth trying to work its way into the southern Bering Sea. This one won't be as significant. What we see on Saturday and Sunday, though, expect a much bigger surge of warmer weather ahead of that stronger area of low pressure. The 2,000-foot freezing line hovering just offshore of Sitka down to Port Alexander and right along the coastline of Craig and Klawock. South Central, sub-freezing for Friday morning. It's going to be even colder on Saturday. Icing potential has levels generally above 1,000 to 2,000 feet across the west and southwest ahead of that front, and then below 6,000 feet because it gets cold again. So we've got kind of a warmer layer in there right now. Above 4,000 feet across areas in the north and western Gulf and Pacific over Kodiak Island. And then, again, one of those warmer layers above 2 to about 6,000 feet across the Yukon and just north of the passes across the outer coast above 5,000 feet. All of that for isolated moderate icing potential. Jet stream has our trough of low pressure sitting across the Gulf and colder air spilling in from the north. The main jet stream coming in around 100 knots or so across the southern Bering Sea. So a lot of northerly winds working in. But you can see more of a westerly flow. That's that active pattern pushing another front in from the west. So winds are turning in from the south and east for southeastern Alaska. Westerlies moving across the interior and northwesterlies across the northern coast at 15 knots. At 3,000 feet, pretty similar pattern there. We've got a little bit more of a northerly push across the Arctic coast. Westerlies 35 to 50 across the southern Bering. Northwesterlies across Kodiak Island, Prince William Sound, and southeast anywhere from 5 to 30 knots. Here's your turbulence then. We're looking at Cook Inlet, parts of Bristol Bay, southwest, and the Bering Strait. Generally considerable moderate, generally below 4,000 feet, and some chop in southeast.
Constellations are imaginary patterns of stars in our night sky. Throughout history, different cultures actually had different constellations. But since 1930, the International Astronomical Union has set the 88 constellations that we all use today. These constellations encompass every star, nebula, and galaxy in the night sky, giving astronomers a way to talk about a region of the sky like astronomical wayfinding. This means, though, that a few stars are shared by more than one constellation. So if you look west at 11 p.m. any night this week, you're going to see a giant square made of 4 stars. This is the great square of Pegasus, the flying horse, and above it is Andromeda, daughter of the vain queen Cassiopeia. At the top of the square is Alpheratz. But even though Alpheratz means navel of the horse, it's not actually part of Pegasus, but officially it's part of the head of Andromeda, which is pretty cool. So look for shared star Alpheratz tonight when you keep looking up.
We're at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We're about 20 minutes before the launch of ICESat-2. You might see the white light off in the distance. That's the Delta II rocket.
It kind of feels like an idea that was always going to just stay an idea. But no, it's real. It's sitting on top of the rocket.
You know, and for me, it's kind of surreal. Like you say, it's been 10 years, and it's hard to believe. It's like, we're really here? This is really about to happen? It's totally cool.
This is Dr. Tom Newman. Over the years, his work has taken him to some pretty remote areas to study changes in the ice regions of our planet. And his research, among many others, has defined the goals of the new NASA satellite, the Ice, Cloud, and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ICESat-2.
And we have ignition.
The story of ICESat-2 really begins with ICESat-1. ICESat told us all kinds of cool things about the ice sheet and about sea ice that we didn't really know to ask. That data allowed us to measure elevation change of ice sheets in a way that we hadn't been able to before, and showed that all the action on the ice sheets, the places that were really changing quickly, were around the edges. So when we were thinking about what could we do better next time, we knew that was one key component.
In addition to the edges of the ice sheets, ICESat-2 needed to measure a dimension of sea ice that remained elusive: its thickness. To figure out how thick sea ice is, you can measure the height of ice sticking out of the ocean, or freeboard, and compare it to the height of water between the sea ice flows, called leads.
The problem is, sea ice is really dynamic, and those cracks open and close various places in the ice pack throughout the day, throughout the year, and what we need to do is have measurements of the ocean whenever it's available, wherever it occurs in the sea ice pack.
To solve that problem, ICESat-2 was designed with a fast pulsing laser instrument to take precise, near-continuous measurements across its 3 pairs of beams. For 10 years, everything about the mission was designed to measure rapid changes in the most rapidly changing part of the cryosphere. But it has to get into space first.
But it's a huge transition going from the ground to in space. We've spent better part of 10 years, thousands of people have been involved, and actually seeing the rocket there on the pad with all of that work kind of all put together in one place, it's pretty amazing. And then getting up in the middle of the night to go watch the actual launch, it's sort of surreal in a way, because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, you know, it's a big deal.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. That's off. That's 1.
Thanks, sweetie. That was awesome. Totally cool. There it went. That was Atlas. Last Delta 2, heading on out. So Atlas has been turned on over the course of the first few weeks of the mission, really culminating for us with the laser. So this is our first look at sea ice data from ICESat 2, and it looks fantastic. The signal levels look great. We've got plenty of photons there. We're capturing ridges. We can clearly see the ocean. All sorts of cool stuff in there, and this is just our first data. It's only going to get better from here on out.
The data from ICESat 2 is well on its way into digging deeper into the unknown dimensions of sea ice sheets, and glaciers. It will shed light on changes in sea level and global weather patterns, and once again find new things about ice we didn't know to ask.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
Slight chance the flight may see ICESat 2 in their center windscreen. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6,
That's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your ice edge now. The Bering Strait is closing off. The Chukchi coast has seen a lot of ice growth out of the sound and around Norton Sound. And you can see that the higher concentration ice, which is colored here in white, is still moving west and also refreezing there. Still don't have a whole lot of ice just north of St. Lawrence Island, but you can see the marginal ice zone is certainly encroaching from the eastern side, and it's certainly building in from the north and west as well. With a lot of cold air, good news, there will be continued ice growth as we go through the rest of the weekend and certainly the rest of the year. Here's a look at southeast now. Northerlies are going to be strong across the Lynn Canal. 30 knots and 6-foot seas there. Look for a northerly flow down through Stevens Passage. Southeasterlies in Clarence Strait, 25 knots and 5-foot seas. And then a steady offshore flow, anywhere from around 20 knots, 10 to 12-foot seas there on the outside as we get into Saturday. Expect a southeasterly flow, 15 knots, 7 to 8-foot seas. And onshore wind south of Sitka, 15 to 20 with a 10-foot sea expected. Northerlies continue through Stevens Passage and the Lynn Canal, and easterlies expected across the Clarence Strait. And again, as that front end disturbance continues to work in, each one of these little waves passing through could certainly strike up a snow or even a rain squall in the south, but a better chance we're going to see snow up in the north. Friday's forecast for Prince William Sound, northerlies there 20 knots, gusts to 35 outside of the Copper River Delta, so that's going to be a very isolated zone of faster moving wind right there. 7-foot seas expected in the region, 6 to 9-foot seas there across the western Gulf and through the Barrens. A northwesterly flow at 35 knots should be expected. Northerlies in the Cook Inlet region, 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas there on Friday. It diminishes a little bit as you get into Saturday, 10 to 15. But notice what happens here in the Barrens. The winds come up sharply there between the end of Kodiak, the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, just in this narrow band, all because that cold air is rushing out. So it will be cold and very windy. Looking for 12-foot seas there in the western Barrens, northerlies inside of Prince William Sound. For southwest in Bristol Bay, look for a southeasterly flow at 25 knots with 5-foot seas coming up to 11-foot seas down the coast, and west and northwesterlies picking up across Kodiak Island with 25 to 30 knot winds, and you're looking at 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, 9-foot seas on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. That picks up again around the Barrens and just southeast of AKwx heading out to sea. Otherwise, 20 to 30 knot winds should do the trick. Looking for 7 to 11-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast side and 7 to 9-foot seas on the Pacific. For the Aleutians, the winds will be generally okay for the central and eastern chain on Friday, but we're going to see some big changes Saturday and into Sunday, especially across the central and western parts of the chain. For Friday, west and southwesterlies here across the western end of the chain, 20 to 30 with 13 to 16-foot seas. But as you get into Saturday, a very strong area of low pressure works in. Storm force winds should be expected. Hurricane force winds may be possible. And so for the Pribilovs, we're expecting to see this leading band of stronger winds move in as we head into Saturday night and Sunday. But behind that is another area of wind wrapping in. So Shemya, Attu, maybe Kiska, certainly Adak should be prepared for some heavy weather Again, wind speeds in the storm force to hurricane force range, and we're looking at 18 to 19 foot seas in the east and probably pushing 25, maybe higher seas out in the west. For Friday, across the west coast, look for a west and southwesterly flow coming in 25 to 40 knots, so strong winds around Savunga, 14-foot seas there. Ison, Norton Sound is good, 25 knots there from the east, 25 knots from the west for St. Paul and St. George. And again, a strong wind coming up Saturday night and into Sunday, so it's not on the chart for you for Saturday for St. Paul and St. George, but keep in mind the winds are going to come up sharply Saturday night, and by Sunday morning you'll know they're there. So again, prepare for that. Westerlies coming in for Norton Sound and around St. Lawrence Island, 15 to 25, 11-foot seas around the Bering Strait. For Friday in the Beaufort, all over the ice, 10 to 20. Look for easterlies blowing offshore for the Chukchi, 30 knots there, and again a southwesterly flow just south of the Bering Strait with a 14-foot sea in the open waters, 11-foot seas there on Saturday, more of a westerly flow. Winds go not quite calm, but certainly calmer across the Beaufort. And then an easterly offshore flow for most of the Chukchi, with the exception of areas around Kotzebue Sound, a westerly wind at 20 knots. Let's recap your weather tonight. Winter weather advisories back in effect for Skagway and Haines, looking for about 2 to 5 inches of snow on top of the almost 15 inches or so of snow we saw mainly around Haines, though. Skagway didn't get the bulk of that snow. Out in the west, a winter weather advisory for Teller, Wales, and then certainly St. Lawrence Island, all because of this front coming in. Expect about 2 to 4 inches of snow and maybe wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. The Yukon Delta also looking at some minor accumulations. Wind's going to be more of your problem there, looking at about 40-mile-an-hour winds. And the eastern Beaufort Seacoast under a winter weather advisory through tonight and tomorrow, all because of lowered visibility, perhaps as much as 1/2 mile. Arctic air is also moving southward. That's front here. As we get into Saturday, that drops southward, putting most of south central, all of southwest, and the interior under the effects of that really, really cold weather. Talk to you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.